Chapter 13, Meeting Paul Flores. In all these years, I've only met Paul actually twice, and they were both very brief. Interestingly enough, the only member of the Flores family that was even semi-polite to me was Paul, and I'll share you with what happened. At this time, this was 1998, 99, I think it was 98. Paul was living in an apartment down in Irvine, California, with his sister Ermelinda. And I had gotten the address through a private investigator, and he was working at, I believe, at the time at an Outback Steakhouse. And he was on national TV, and they fired him as soon as he came out. But anyway, he was living in an apartment at Irvine, and I found the address, and I walked over there one day, and it was on the second floor, so I walked up steps, knocked on the door, and this lady answered the door, and I mentioned my name, and I mentioned Kristen, and she slammed and said, "Get out of here!" She just slammed the door. That was Ermelinda, you know. And so, well, that didn't go too well. And I remember they had a big porch on the second floor, right outside the door, and I had a paperback book with me. I said, "Well, Paul's got to come sooner or later, so I'm gonna stand there." I had nothing. That was my whole reason for being out in California, to talk to these people. So I was going to wait them out. That was my idea. And so I remember taking my book out, and I was just starting to read. And I was only reading for like maybe not even a minute. I got really lucky. I didn't know it at the time, but Paul wasn't at home. He was out, but he was coming back home, and he was actually riding a bicycle. And so this kid, this blonde-haired kid, comes rolling up, parks his bike at the bottom of the steps, and he's just walking up the steps in a very casual way, you know. And then he notices me. He doesn't know who I am. I said, "Paul?" He goes, "Yeah." I go, "Hi, Paul, I'm Dennis." He goes, "Hey, how you doing?" And he shakes my hand. And then as soon as that happens, the door opens up, and Ermelinda comes out in a rage. And she literally yanks Paul by the arm and just drags him inside the house and slams the door. And that was it. And then, of course, about 5 minutes later, the Irvine Police Department police officer comes up and asks me for my ID, and I tell him what's going on. He goes, "Well, Dennis, she's asked you to leave the property, so you got to go." And I said, "Okay." So on my way out, I went by the office. I remember it was a Saturday morning. I remember this because they had a girl working there just part-time. And she was a young girl, a nice young woman, early 20s. And I gave her a flyer that I was passing out. And what I remember about her is that she started crying when she read it, because I didn't know it, but she also lived in that apartment community, and she was a brand new mother. She just had a baby, a child, and she actually broke down in tears. And I had to say, Paul's not going to attack your child. No, that's not his MO. That's not his MO. And I got her, she wasn't bawling crying, but you could see the tears coming out of her eyes, you know. And I was able to calm her down a little bit. I said, just be aware of this is going on in your community. And I said, "Thank you," and I left. And then a couple years later, they had moved up to Orange, California. And I guess Ermelinda was married to a guy named Brett MacArthur. And it seemed like wherever Brett and Ermelinda moved, Paul was with them. So I guess, Paul probably had a hard time finding a job or a place to live, given what he's got going on in his life. So he would always live with them. And so when I found out where they were living, I was passing out flyers in that neighborhood. And I actually knocked on the door, and I gave a flyer right to Ermelinda, and it took her a second to recognize me. She goes, "Oh, I know who you are. You're that psycho from Georgia." I said, "No, it's North Carolina, actually, Ermelinda." And she slammed the door on me again. And so for a couple of days, I'd go back to the neighborhood. I was passing out flyers in that neighborhood. And one day I was at the neighbor's house passing out flyers, and the door opens where Paul lived, and I could see Paul. He was stuck his head out. He's looking at me, and all he would ever say to me was, "Go home, go home, go home." I said, "Paul, I'm not going home." And but he wouldn't talk to me. So those are the only two times I actually met Paul, and those were the only two times I actually met Ermelinda too. So Ermelinda right now is living up in Washington State. She divorced that guy Brett MacArthur, and she remarried, and she's living up in the state of Washington now. And Paul is down in San Pedro. All right, thank you.